Hey guys, Mr. E here, and today I want to break down a discussion that I recently had with a fellow YouTuber and friend of mine, Reginald. He is perhaps the only other true Darktide YouTuber at this point. One of the last ones remaining who is like big and drawing views to the game. He is a serious a longtime warrior for the game. He has been in the trenches longer than pretty much anybody else, and kudos to him for sticking with it through some pretty dark times, no pun intended. He is also a playtester, which means that he gets early access. I mean, I get early access because I'm a community whatever, but he gets early access. So he played with Arbides for like a month before I even did, and so he knows a lot about the game, and he knows and thinks a lot about weapon balance specifically, which I think is more of his purview than mine personally. So I want to summarize the discussion helpfully, because Reginald is a huge nerd. I don't think he would take much offense to me saying that. He documented everything that we discussed back and forth in this balance sheet here. I'm not going to be going over this whole thing, right? It's this long. So I'm going to stop like right about here, because this all down here is weapon-based stuff. And as I just said, I don't know a whole lot about weapons. I also did dip about like halfway through this conversation about weapons. And so I'll let that scroll by and you can look at that, or you can go and view the full VOD on Reginald's channel if you want to catch the weapon part, or you can just view the part that has me and him back and forth on my channel. I'll link both in the description. What I want to say about weapon balance is I think that his ideas about weapon balance are great and all, but I think they come as like secondary or tertiary to the class reworks and the enemy balance, because the fundamental thing that we need to talk about when we're talking balance in this game, which is what this discussion was about, is the relationship between the character power and the enemy power. And the fundamentals of character power are not generally their weapons, right? Classes can have access to some pretty dang powerful weapons, but still be way weaker than other classes because they're missing out on blitzes, abilities, keystones, and talents that just set those classes apart. So excluding a few like select options, weapons really aren't the be-all end-all of a given class. It's usually incumbent on the class itself. So I want to focus today on talking about the what we discussed in the part where we were discussing classes and enemies and the interrelation between them, and hopefully you can pause that wherever you want and see the text version of what Reginald thinks about these weapons. So let's scroll all the way back up the top, and remember to subscribe to myself, subscribe to Reginald, and check those description links to see the full video if you want to hear it straight from the horses' mouths. Okay, so the first thing we discussed, from like Donkey Kong or whatever, right? The first thing we discussed was the balance anchor. Where do we want to sort of like place player power in terms of weaponry? We couldn't really idealize this for classes because classes are so in the lurch right now, but we have a good selection of weaponry in existence, and so we were able to pick out two options that I think really exemplify a good level of player agency and power. And the first option for melee would be the Relic Blade. The Zealot weapon, a very powerful Zealot weapon, definitely S tier, but it is not a weapon that is designed without downsides. And that's, I think, what drew us both to this as a great sort of baseline for power. This weapon does absurd damage. It has amazing horde clear, pretty decent like boss single target damage, and it's just a powerhouse. Excuse me, but it isn't a Swiss Army knife. It isn't a one size fits all solution, right? It's not a very mobile weapon. It is a kind of a pretty good defensive weapon because there's a few activated frames where you can block attacks and all that stuff. And it does have a learning curve, right? It's not a very simple weapon to use in a lot of respects. So this weapon represents probably the finest things about Darktide's weapon design, because it is a very cool weapon to use, both from the fantasy standpoint and the power standpoint, and it has a lot of capability of growing with your player potential, and it isn't just super boring as compared to the dueling sword, which is, first of all, overtuned and makes other options invalid by its very existence, it is also a very boring weapon that has one way to play with it, and there's really no finesse, no pun intended, to its utilization. And the Relic Blade is a great model for how we would like to have weapons be going forward in the melee category. For the range category, we settled around the reworked plasma gun. This is my suggestion. I saw the plasma gun nerf, quote unquote, in those leaked patch notes from a few weeks ago, or maybe even a month ago at this point, where they're shifting some of the power away from left click spam and putting it on right click. This weapon is still going to be very, very strong. It's still going to retain its position at the top of the power structure, but it's going to have nuance to how it's used, right? It's going to be strong against all enemy types because it does have that armor penetration capability, because it can pierce through long lines of enemies, but it isn't just going to be an easy solution, right? It's going to require some investment and some setup to charge that gun. So that, I think, to me represents a really solid idea for a ranged weapon. I think the other ranged weapon that is probably on a similar power level to that would be like the Recon las gun, but the Recon las gun is a little bit like simple in its implementation, and I would like the weapons to be more interesting for range going forward. But that's sort of where we were at power wise for these are the power peak, right? We don't want things to really exceed this. It's okay if they're like 5% more powerful than this, but we don't want a situation where there's weapons that are 20-30% more powerful than the Relic Blade, like the Dueling Sword is currently. Then we talked about the classes. This is where I think we both agreed that the reworks, first and foremost, have to happen, right? There is no point in having this discussion if we are to keep the power dynamics the way they currently are, because right now the power disparity between the classes in the game is just far too high to create any sort of semblance of balance, right? If you balance the game around classes or teams full of veterans and psychers, it's going to be way the fuck harder than if you balance it around teams of Ogryns and RBDs, because Ogryns and RBDs are like doubly as strong. So the reworks need to happen to the unreworked 3 classes, and then we'll see where the chips lay after that, and then we can start to think about how we would tweak enemies and challenge ratings, as well as the weapons available to the classes to get them leveled out. Because I think that will bring us much more in like a line in terms of where the power level is for the characters in general, and then therefore it'll be much more easy to figure out where the enemies need to be to give us a reasonable challenge. So we first talked about Ogryn, and we wanted to talk about both nerfs and buffs. Ogryn and RBs, we settled on, well, this is mainly led by Reginald, but I do agree in a good portion with this. Ogryn and RBDs are very, very powerful as compared to the cast of other characters, and that perhaps could just be nerfed a little bit, because it is kind of like it's going to take them a while to rework the other characters right, and it feels shameful to have these other 2 characters that are just heads and shoulders better than the 3 humanoid cast of characters. I would love if maybe there could be some temporary fixes done to get these classes more in parity, and this I think is mostly what we're appealing to here. So for Ogryn, my main claim was, as far as like nerfs that might come to the Ogryn, or that like I think that maybe the Ogryn would be a little bit more balanced with, it would be hitting his damage reduction some. I think his damage reduction is pretty excessive. As I've touched on in some of my videos about him, he pretty much invalidates all content that's non-Havoc because of the sheer damage reduction that he has to both his health and toughness, because he has generic damage reduction, not just toughness damage reduction, and he also has a fuck ton of health on top of that. So he can just kind of like eat everything on the chin, whereas if you are playing the same level of difficulty with Psyker, you would die 20 times over, no joke, to the same amount of damage. So I think that, I think that for just the general player experience of having some parity between classes and not making players who pick Psyker as their starting class versus pick Ogryn as their starting class feel shitty, that maybe his damage reduction could come down. Reginald hit on Batter. He thinks that the Batter is stacking up too quickly, Batter being 2 stacks of bleed on light attack, 4 stacks on heavy attack. Before the change to Batter, it was only 4 stacks of bleed on heavy attack, and that was forcing every single build to run Batter and just heavy attack attack only, right? And now it's inversed because 2 stacks of bleed can be applied much more quickly with certain weapons than 4 stacks with most weapons. I think that perhaps this is not a necessary buff. He said that they should make it 1 stack of bleed on light attack. I countered that perhaps there should just be a cap when you are light attacking. Like, you cannot push the cap of bleeds past, say, 8 stacks with light attacks. Heavy attacks will give much deeper wounds to enemies and therefore can go up to the full cap of 16 or something. This is an instance, sort of way that they deal with the overwhelming damage of dots in the game on things like the Recon las guns fire, the Infernus modifier. They can give up to 12 stacks of burn when the cap is actually 16. Same thing applies to the Ogryn's, I think it's called Fire Away talent, which is actually right here, gives up to 8 stacks of burns for explosives detonating nearby when the cap again is 16, because those cap numbers are very, very, very high, so you don't want players to achieve them with very little effort. You want them to have to work for a little bit to get the damage numbers up to where they're doing hundreds and hundreds of damage per tick. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing about batter here is that a lot of the problem with batter and spamming light attacks is coming down to a few select weapons, Bully Club Mark III, being overtuned in terms of its light attack spams. And if we took some of that power away, then perhaps there would be more shift towards playing with heavy attacking weapons. Skipping past a little bit here, we also touched on Fire Away. I don't think Fire Away is that big of an issue. I think Fire Away is an issue because Rumbler is an issue, the radius of Rumbler is an issue, and the armor reduction, the brittleness that Rumbler has is an issue. If you're using this with Rumbler, you'll up your damage by 20% over the course of a game because it's just doing that much. But without Rumbler, there's almost no other weapons that benefit from this at all, so it seems a silly talent to nerf in my opinion. As far as other nerfs that were proposed, Impactful was a choice of mine. Impactful is the up to 80% impact node in the bottom left keystone under Heavy Hitter. I think this is just an auto-include. It seriously makes your impact on weapon attacks for the Ogryn just exceed what is reasonable, I think. There's no counterplay that any enemy can do against you, excepting bosses. Crushers are getting staggered with 2 light attacks, with Impactful being as strong as it is, and this is already on the Ogryn's strongest keystone for melee. So yeah, he's just staggering enemies out of ever being able to attack, which means you're not interacting with one core part of the gameplay puzzle, which is, you know, dodging and blocking enemies. You instead just hit them until they are permanently staggered and then they die, because every weapon now has enough impact to stagger, you know, it at the highest tier. And then finally, I think we both kind of agreed that Taunt is like overwhelmingly powerful on the class. The Taunt is like crazy good, right? It's a burst regeneration and lingering regeneration, and it controls every ally or every enemy that's in a huge radius around you for, what is it, like 16 seconds or something like that. And then, of course, it has this huge knockback that can even knock back bosses on its activation, and you can lower the cooldown to like 20 seconds using the stagger cooldown reduction node on it. So Taunt is just kind of an all-around oppressive ability. It is a offensive / defensive powerhouse. You are much less likely to die with Taunt than any other ability on the class, and it also just invalidates huge groups of enemies. I think personally the way that I would nerf Taunt is to remove the stagger on the initial cast of it. I think that staggering enemies and CCing enemies like that is something that Ogryn already does plenty of and doesn't need to have for free on a 20-second cooldown like Veteran Shout does, where it just hits everything and knocks it to the ground. I also think that the identity behind pushing over enemies and staggering enemies should be akin to the Bull Rush ability. That should be his role, rather than just having the Ogryn's Taunt ability do the same thing, but in a 360-degree radius plus a bunch of other benefits. So I think that would be probably the change that I would do to it. It can keep all of the taunting effects, it can keep all the regeneration effects, but that stagger is a little bit too disruptive, and it puts the game on pause on a class that is already abusing the hell out of the fact the enemies can't do anything, can't even act against you. For buffs, though, there is a couple of things that we thought could be done to help the Ogryn out. One was suggested by a viewer in Reginald's chat, saying that Dodge Linger would be nice in the class. Dodge Linger is the effect where like the enemies don't immediately start locking onto you and attacking you until it's been a certain amount of time after you've dodged. For other classes, they have a good amount of time, which is why they can chain like dodge slides or like sprint slides and stuff like that in order to like escape damage. For the Ogryn, you really can't do that because the enemies will snap back onto you like the millisecond you were done dodging, which can mean you end up in a chain of dodges, or you're just like guaranteed to take a hit. So that would be nice. And then a rework to Point Blank Barrage was my desire here. I think Point Blank Barrage, if you notice from my content, I did not produce any Ogryn builds with this because I think it's a junk ability currently. It doesn't offer anything special to any of the weapons in the lineup. You can do pretty much like 90% of the damage that it would be doing just running taunt instead to get way more survivability and all that stuff, just general utility for the team. So it's just kind of irrelevant. It doesn't give enough DPS to not choose taunt, not choose charge. So I believe that Point Blank Barrage needs a rework and needs to be brought up in power a lot. For Arbites, Reginald I think had a list going in here. He really wanted to hit the Arbites. I do agree in some regard. The Arbites is kind of like, just looking at his talent list, it is just all S tier stuff. It is all obscenely powerful. Like the exercise that I underwent earlier today, based on the recording of this video, to make like the worst, or actually I didn't do that, that was a gremlin that did that, but to make the worst possible Arbites build, it's really fucking hard, right? This class is saturated with super powerful nodes, and like not choosing those powerful nodes is almost an exercise in itself. So firstly, 5% off Force of Will refers to the 10% toughness you get back every time you stagger an enemy with an attack. So this is like on staggering attack. So every weapon swing you get 10% of your toughness back. That makes Ogryn's toughness regeneration 5% on target, like on an attack that hits a single target or multi-target, look like a chump, right? Because you can trigger that on top of other buffs as well. So that's just, when I first saw that talent, I said, "Oh, this is overtuned. Like this is just too much." It puts other toughness regenerating talents in the game to shame, and this is something that we'll come back to over and over again when we talk about this. Is that the Arbites is already a really, really hard class to kill. He does really solid damage, and he has a lot of CC that he can offer, and he also happens to have about 8 different ways he can regenerate his toughness, and that makes him like way safer than every other class in the game, excepting Ogryn and Zealot, who obviously Zealot has his own reasons he's unkillable. But this guy can burst his toughness back to full instantly with 2 of his abilities, or he can just do it with his weapon in like 2 seconds because of things like Force of Will. The other one that we agreed was really stupid powerful is Walk It Off. When you spend a stamina, you get 5% of your toughness per second for 3 seconds. You're always spending stamina in this game, right? This is as good as giving this class 5% toughness every second, always. And it's currently also bugged, so it's like triggering when you're not supposed to. We also talked about the quote-unquote Castigator Stance problem. Castigator Stance is a very interesting ability, right? Well, actually, I guess this is the problem. It's not really an interesting ability. It is an ability where you just turn your brain off because you have 10 seconds where, thanks to all the regeneration of toughness and damage reduction this class has, you are as good as invincible. And you just walk through enemies like they're not even there, and you go boom, boom, boom. And this synergizes in, a positive way for players who want to be powerful, but a negative way for like actual game balance. When you're choosing the cooldown reduction that's in the bottom left keystone, that means that you can have this up like over a third of the time, and that means it's just insanely, it's already hard enough to kill this guy without him having an ability that makes him pseudo-invincible for 10 seconds every 30 seconds. Castigator Stance is also just like kind of generally uninteresting unless you take all of the nodes in it and get some extra stuff out of it. I don't remember what we agreed on, but I think we were talking about like maybe reworking the node that is the 75% dog damage on Castigator Stance, because that's such a junk node that no one even cares about. So something about the Castigator Stance issue we would like to be done, because it's just a very uninteresting ability. It's incredibly powerful. It's like stupidly powerful, but it's just an uninteresting ability to play and to have on your team, because it doesn't affect the team at all. It's just like, okay, there's a guy on my team that can't die. That's his whole deal, is he just won't die. Then we talked about Mallocator. Mallocator is a node underneath the execution order bottom left keystone on RBDs that gives you 50% extra cooldown regeneration when you've killed a target marked by this keystone in the last 8 seconds. So this is really powerful, right? Its cooldown reduction in this game is already powerful, and this happens to be underneath his best keystone already. Even if you remove this from this keystone, it would still be neck and neck in terms of power with Forceful, his other really good keystone for melee. There'd still be reasons to pick this one, even then, because of the crazy dog damage and all that stuff. For me personally, I think that, as we talked about many times during this, cooldown reduction is a problem with certain abilities. I think that cooldown reduction should be inherently tied to abilities that are fun and healthy for the game when they can be used in rapid succession. I don't believe necessarily that any of the things that the Arbites has access to are necessarily all that good or balanced with cooldown reduction, but maybe like Nuncio Aquila could have access to cooldown reduction. But I think that giving Castigator Stance this access to having half of its cooldown taken off is probably a toxic issue, and this issue comes back up of cooldown when we talk about Zealot in a second as well. So we couldn't really reach a consensus there. I am of the firm opinion, though, that there should still be cooldown reduction effects in the game, but they should be based around like playing like very well, rather than just being like, okay, the dog killed someone in the last 8 seconds, you get a bunch of cooldown back, because why would you not choose that, right? We also agreed that the Arbites has far too many just 15% damage nodes, like generic damage nodes. These are a bit of an issue for balance, because like you can't balance weapons when you have a class that gets 90% damage from his nodes alone. So other classes, when you look at the damage that's offered on their talent trees, it's like somewhere in the realm of like maybe 45-ish%, and the RBD's no joke can have like 90% with like certain builds for melee. And that gets increasingly hard to balance weapons around, because it's like, okay, do we balance the Agni Shock Maul for Veteran, or do we balance it for the guy that can do twice as much damage with it? And if you don't want it to be overpowered, you have to balance it somewhere in the middle, but that really hurts the Veteran. So yeah, the 15% damage nodes are excessive, and they also overflow into making the Arbites grenades do like 60% more damage than they should, because these are 15% generic damage nodes and not just melee or ranged. So yeah, kind of nuts. And then drive them back as a cleave node. This is, it's a really good node. It's crazy. And then Lone Wolf is being, sort of a definitely like a huge power creep issue. Again, this remains to be seen where Veteran ends up as a comparison, but it makes Veteran look like a joke when there's one talent on this tree that gives you an extra grenade and one grenade every minute, plus 15% toughness damage reduction, plus 10% attack speed, plus 10% damage, right? It gives you all this stuff for one node. All you lose is the dog, who you might not even be spec'd into anyway, and it would take like 4 or 5 nodes on the Veteran to get the same effectiveness, and the grenades on this class on the whole are just so much more impactful. So yeah, we thought that perhaps that cooldown should be higher, because when you're playing Lone Wolf with like shock mines or whatever, you literally always have a shock mine. There's like no engagements you'll ever be going into where you don't have one, or you'll always be like running like 3 or 4 RBDs grenades in your backpack, and plus you can pick them up in the environment environment, and that's just a little bit excessive because this guy is like hurling these things out like they're candy. As far as buffs, though, I do think that RBDs needs buffs. This was my suggestion to Terminus Warrant. If you caught my video for it a couple days ago, I think that Terminus Warrant isn't at all operating in the way that it is intended, just based on its like design. And it would be a really cool thing and healthy thing for the class if it had something that is on parity or like similar power level to its other two keystones, because remember, that wouldn't power creep the class. It's not going to make the class any more powerful. The class is already as powerful as it is because players are choosing either forceful or execution order, and they're bypassing Terminus Warrant entirely. So if we can take Terminus Warrant and move it to a better position where it's more generally usable, it'll make it a more fun thing to play around, and I do think that has some potential. Okay, and we wrapped up talking about these classes with the Zealot. The Zealot is the only other class that I think we really wanted to touch on in this discussion, because the other two classes are in such bad need of reworks, it's almost not worth like talking about them, because, you know, any rework that potentially comes to these guys would completely overhaul them. Now, for Zealot is almost in a decent place power-wise, and Reginald really wanted to pick my brain and get my thoughts on where Chorus specifically is at, and Chorus especially in interaction with Invocation of Death, which is his cooldown reduction talent. Now, Chorus is, in my personal opinion, an incredibly boring ability. It is also, unfortunately, an incredibly powerful ability. It puts the whole game, including bosses, on pause for 6.5 seconds. It gives me time to check the chat and all that stuff, but it's just a boring reset button. And the problem that Chorus has, well, I mean, the good thing for Chorus users is that you can get obscene cooldown reduction on this class between the interaction of Invocation of Death and Pious Cutthroat. Invocation of Death triples your cooldown generation for 4 seconds every time you get a crit, and Pious Cutthroat, every time you get a backstab, it gets 20% off of the base of your cooldown. So every backstab with this talent is 12 seconds off of Chorus, and then every time you get a crit, you're generating an extra 8 seconds of cooldown over the next 4 seconds. So yeah, in the span of no longer than 20 seconds, you'll have back a cooldown that is supposed to have a 60-second base cooldown, which is obviously not balanced to the game. It's not good that the enemies spend 1/3 of their time just pulsing to the beat and not able to act at all, and your allies also spend 1/3 of the time invincible as a result. So yeah, we wanted to make this be a more, well, firstly, like balanced sort of situation, and secondly, have it be more engaging, because the worst part of this is the Chorus player gets to do fuck all, right? It's the most boring possible role you could take, because you spend 1/3 of your game, if you're playing optimally, literally doing nothing. You are just walking, and you can look at enemies, but you can't do anything. You can walk around, you can't sprint, anything like that. So I think the most interesting idea by far that I saw anyone come up with was that it should have a like a charge meter, and it took me forever to think of what this was that I was conceptualizing from another game, and I thought it was a similar game to Darktide, and I guess Reginald came back in here and added it in afterwards, but it is indeed the Dwarf Gatling gun from the Outcast Engineer from Vermintide 2. So if you're not familiar, his ultimate in that game is he pulls out the Gatling gun and he can shoot it, and it drains his ultimate bar. You can shoot it as little or as much as you want until you're out of the ultimate bar. Then you have to crank it back up, and it starts regenerating based on how much you cranked it. In this situation, I would say that the book should just regenerate its own like holy juice over time, but you would have like a finite amount of holy juice, and then you could choose, okay, I have like a full bar. I can just do one quick pulse to knock enemies back and get some gold toughness in everyone's bars, and then I can continue with my melee attacking because there's some important enemies I need to eliminate right now. Or I can really commit, and I can use all of my juice in this cast and channel it for a really long time, because my team needs me to buy them time, needs me to hold enemies. And more importantly, this would also have some amazingly cool like interplay with the talents as written, where when you cast for 5 pulses, you either get 40% 30% toughness damage reduction or 30% damage increase to the whole team. And those talents right now are brain dead, no shit. Like, you're gonna take them and you're always gonna take 5 pulses, right? There is almost never a situation, like I'm talking about 99% of the time, there is no situation where you are going to cancel your ultimate early to do anything, because the enemies are not attacking. The enemies are paused too. So since they're paused, you might as well go ahead and channel the whole fucking thing, because you got the time, right? You got infinite time as it currently is. So there is no decision currently with how long should I channel this ability. The answer is always do the full 7 pulses, because it holds enemies for the longest and it gives you the most benefit in return. With this new sort of system, there could be a choice, like, okay, I could cast it real quick and get some small buffs, and obviously then, like, because it's a juice bar, it's a Gatling like recharge. If you only use 1 pulse, you still have a bunch left in the tank. It doesn't automatically put it on this long ass cooldown that you have to wait for. It is now like, okay, you've got more. You could just do it again in like 2 seconds. So I think it's a really cool idea. The other thing that we talked about with Zealot is Invocation of Death. This talent is just, it has toxic interactions. Cooldown abilities in general in this game have toxic interactions with certain like class abilities. It is so hard to balance class abilities when there is the potential for characters to lower those cooldowns drastically. Like, you know, the Veteran Shout, obviously 30 seconds is too short a cooldown for an ability that's as good as Veteran Shout, but also there is the ability to lower the cooldown by 6 seconds every time you kill a specialist enemy. So veterans that know what they're doing at a high level are casting Shout every 8 seconds or something like that, and that just completely breaks the way that the build is designed, the game is designed, and like, yeah, it's just completely silly. Same thing applies here with both Chorus and to probably a lesser extent Shroud Field, because I don't see too much Shroud Field abuse in the current meta of the game. But those abilities, because they are so powerful, if you synergize those, if you put them together with cooldown reduction, they end up being kind of game breaking. In one sense, for the Chorus, it just puts the game on pause. In the other sense, for Shroud Field, it just completely allows you to negate the challenge of the game. You can literally, as I've shown in clips and shorts and stuff before, you can literally chain stab and backstab in such a way that you are never out of stealth, utilizing double stabs and stuff with Shroud Field. So yeah, I think that personally, the way that Invocation of Death should be handled is to assign these cooldown reduction buffs to a certain ability that can work well with the cooldown. And so for me, I think if we nerfed Invocation of Death, it would hurt, yes, it would hurt Shroud Field, and yes, it would hurt Chorus, but the one that it would absolutely gut would be Fury of the Faithful, the charge ability, because that ability relies on having a short cooldown and multiple charges. And so if you took away this 10-second cooldown from it, this ability would be hugely impacted. It would really gut it, and I don't want to see that happen to it, because I think that's one of the only like ways that Zealot is competitive with Arbites and Ogryn in terms of damage. So I think that it should be assigned to Fury of the Faithful, that ability can also, if you're getting crits with some consistency, it can also have this really short cooldown. And that's what we thought about the classes. So let me know what you think about the classes down in the comments. And then we only have a short little while to go here. I want to talk about what we were discussing about these enemies next. So for enemies, the discussion came down to, okay, what are we gonna do with like the enemy situation of the game? Because the enemies are kind of like really boring right now. And this is a video that's coming up for me, but I'm going to kind of elucidate a little bit of the point here, which is that every enemy in this game is just a glorified groaner, right? The groaners have 3 to 4 attacks, and so do crushers, right? The only difference between a crusher and the weakest enemy in the game is that the crusher has more HP and he hits you harder, and that's it. And he's got a different armor type. So what needs to happen personally is that we need to disincentivize this elite spam, and this is something that Reginald agreed on as well. I think that's the thing we are both very focused on realizing is the reality. We don't want the difficulty curve of the game to be majorly adjusted based on how many enemies there are. Because right now what happens is as you promote yourself into difficulties like Havoc, it erases the fundamental way the game is designed to be played and replaces it with something else entirely. So let me put it to you this way, right? When you're in a Auric Damnation, which I guess is just called Auric now, you have a situation where there's like 3 crushers in front of you, right? And you can walk up to one and you can engage on him hard. You might knock him down. You might lower him enough that he can be finished off one more attack. But then the second guy comes in and you got to block him. And then the third guy comes in with his swing and you got to dodge him. But then you go back in for a counter strike and you kill that first guy. And then you can, rinse and repeat, and you can do the dance against these 3 enemies, right? Every enemy that's added makes the dance a little bit more complicated, and enemies are going to come at you from different directions and make you sort of like a dog jumps at you, have to dodge that. So that is part of the combat puzzle. It's part of the interwoven, intricate dance you have to do to solve the combat puzzle in this game, which is cool. What's not cool is when the game spawns 25 of a certain enemy type and then says, okay, deal with this. Because suddenly you have you've gone from a puzzle that has 1,000 pieces with intricately designed little nubbins that go in the different holes and stuff to a 10,000 piece puzzle where all of the sides are flat and all of the puzzle pieces are perfectly black, right? There's no way to solve that in the conventional way using your actual skills at dodging and parrying and stuff. The only way that you have to kill these, and this happens a lot in High Havoc. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, go watch some videos of me doing High Havoc. What'll happen is the game goes fucking crazy. It spawns in 10 Crushers, 8 Ragers, 3 Bulwarks, and a bunch of Reapers behind all that, and then you're just kiting around this massive death ball. And there is no conventional way to fight and solve this combat equation. You can't dodge and block and parry when there's 15 enemies that are trying to hit you at the same time. There's just too many enemies. And it doesn't matter that their attacks are really simple or whatever. There's no windows for you to actually do anything, and so there's no room for actual counterplay. So what do? Well, if you are Ogren or if you're Ogren, you can either shoot the Rumbler at it and disrupt it and throw it all on the ground, or you can just start hitting it with your club and stagger it so it can't fight back against you. If you're the Psyker, you shoot the Flame Staff at it and you run away forever. If you're the Zealot, you use Chorus and you just hold it all still so your team can kill it, or you use your charge and you blow up one enemy and then you run away for a while and you blow up another enemy single target, eliminate them over time. But none of the characters, Zealot or Veteran, would shout, knock them to the ground. Castigator's stance or the charge ability on the RBs would either ignore the damage they're dealing to you or just knock them all on their asses and then beat them to death while they're there, right? You literally cannot interact with that number of enemies without them being CC'd or disabled from doing what they're going to do in some way, shape, or form. So obviously, having that number of enemies, that number of threats in one zone at one time just tilts the favor in favor of classes that can solve the combat equation by just nullifying the number of enemies, by just saying, okay, I don't care if there's 50 enemies in front of me, they are now all staggered, so I get to do whatever I want for 6 seconds. So we want to move away from that, and the way we're going to move away from that is to reduce elite spam. The way we're going to do that is by making every elite that gets spawned on the map much more impactful, right? So currently, there is only one impactful elite, and that is the Rager. I think this is a point that I brought up. The Rager is an elite that when they show up, you're like, oh shit, I need to adjust how I am playing, because if I don't, the Ragers will surround you and they will beat your toughness, or they'll beat your toughness down, but they'll also break your stamina in 1 millisecond. So you need to play around them and get yourself into a position where you can stagger them or keep them away from you, because they are unrelenting. So they have a very, they have a simple attack pattern, but there's something you have to play around there. For Crushers and Maulers, they are exactly identical to each other. It's just one is tall and one is small. And So what we want to do is redefine what these classes are, or what these enemies are, and what they do, and therefore make them actually interesting when they show up. So we think that Crushers, this is something that we agreed on together, by the way, should be like mini bosses, like mini bosses, sort of on the level of captains, but make them less annoying than captains, where captains take like 85 hours to kill. Crushers should take a little bit less time to kill, but they definitely need to have more health, more HP, more stagger resistance, and movement speed, because right now, Crushers are invalidated by an Ogre light attacking them twice and staggering them to the floor and then beating them to death while they're on the floor. It doesn't matter how much health they have at that point, right? So this is something that Reginald brings up, but Tanner, he saved Ogre, remember that guy. I said long ago, was, hey, you want to make the game more interesting? Just make Crushers have like 10 times HP. Make them have like literally 50,000 HP. And then players will actually have to play around like what attacks they can do. Because you don't even know, like players know that Crushers have the overhead attack. Did you know that the Crusher can punch you? That he has a left hook that he can throw? It's like a really quick short jab. You don't know that because no one ever sees these attacks, because the enemies never get a chance to do it because they're getting blown up in 1.2 milliseconds. So Crushers need to go way up in terms of their power and survivability, and there needs to only be like 1 or 2 of them in any given engagement. Maulers, similar thing needs to happen for them. They need to have a defining trait. I don't know what that is. We couldn't come up with an idea, but like there needs to be something of like, okay, this enemy pack has a couple of Maulers in it. I need to be watching out for them to do X thing, whether that's like hamstringing you and slowing your movement speed or whatever it is. There needs to be something that defines playing against Maulers versus playing against anything else. Bulwarks, we both hate and really want to see change. Reginald and his community had the idea, which I think many players have had, which is that the shield should be able to be broken, right? It shouldn't just last all day, especially against like explosive weapons. It should either get broken entirely, or you can like chip pieces off of it and expose weak points for you to hit on the Bulwark. It's just far too frustrating having an enemy that has no interplay. Like he's not damaging you and you're not damaging him, and you're just sitting around and waiting for him to do the overhead attack where he actually opens himself up, and it's boring as fuck. Personally, I threw out the idea that was given to me by a viewer of a very long time ago, but he always thought that Bulwarks would be much more engaging if they had 2 modes. And at long range, they're in the defensive mode, the current mode that we have, right? They're acting as gap closers for the cover for the enemies that are coming in and for shooters behind them. But once they get within a certain range of you, they enter into an aggressive mode and they become crowd control enemies, where they're coming up and they're doing like Rinda Karnak does, where she pushes you around, where she pushes you out of position and she clobbers you and staggers you in the way that like getting, when like a dog pounces someone nearby you and it pushes you and you lose control of your character for like a half second, that sort of thing. He's coming in and he's swinging his arms wide, he's like swinging his shield open wide. He's much more vulnerable here. He's gone into berserker mode, so his shield is wide open. You can hit him now, but if you aren't killing him, he's going to disrupt your position. He's going to disrupt your coherency with your allies and just be a huge pain. So that would make them much more interactive, and I think it would be a cool thing to see with enemies, and having a sort of like staged engagement where they have like a couple different ways they can behave and different behaviors. Okay, and then finally here, Reginald pointed out that event spawns are broken in the game, where like mid-level events or ending events just like spawn a trickle of enemies, and then you stand around being bored as fuck forever. So that's it, guys. That's everything I wanted to go over here anyway. We talked a little bit about the weapons, but I couldn't make it all the way through this discussion because it got late and I had to go to Neepy. So if you want to go check this out, the full VOD is linked in the description below. The full VOD to Reginald's is linked in the description below as well. I really appreciate you for watching, and catch you next time. Mystery out. Bye.